Hello, hello, welcome everyone. Welcome to Race in the PR Classroom. We're just gonna give it a few more moments to allow some people to enter and then we'll get started. Welcome. Welcome everyone. I'm gonna give it maybe about 30 more seconds or another moment or so, and then we will get started. All right, we'll go ahead and get started. Welcome again, everyone. My name is Anitra Henry. I am the Senior Director of Strategic Initiatives for IPR, the Institute for Public Relations. I'm so excited to welcome you all to this season 2 of Race in the PR Classroom, presented by IPR and the PRSA Educators Academy. We are so grateful that you all are here with us today. Joining me is going to be our co-host and moderator for the panel, Dr. Nika Logan from PRSA Educators Academy, Associate Professor at Virginia Tech University. Welcome, Nika, and just send out a little wave to everybody so they could see you. IPR and PRSA Educators Academy have been partnering on the Race in the PR Classroom since June of 2020. In that time, we have featured primarily biopic leaders talking about race in the classroom. This time we're mixing it up to talk to some white allies in the DE&I space about their experiences in the classroom and journey toward greater understandings and learnings in the DEI space. We chose these specific individuals because they are leaders in this area and have been very vocal in their journeys. Today, we're discussing white people's experiences in the classroom and their journey to becoming an ally. I'd like to welcome our panelists today, Dr. Katie Place, Associate Professor at Quinnipiac, Dr. Adrian Wallace, Associate Professor at Grand Valley State University, and Dr. Luke Capizzo, Assistant Professor at James Madison University. Thank you all for being here and sharing your personal experiences with us. Before we begin, just a few housekeeping items. Please understand that this is a Q&A type forum. To ask a question, all you have to do is drop it in the chat or raise your hand on your virtual hand using Zoom. Once you're called on, please remember to state your name and organization. If you would like to ask a question anonymously, please type the message to the hosts in the chat. So that would be me or Nika. And we will read your question aloud. Only the moderators are able to see your question, so you will remain anonymous. Today's session will be recorded and will be available for playback later today. And lastly, please remain respectful to our hosts and our panelists and others by keeping yourself muted at all times unless you intend to speak or you're called on for one of your questions. And now let's get to it. I'm going to turn it over to Nika, and she's going to have our panelists introduce themselves.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedules to be here today. We really appreciate your support and look forward to a very insightful and rich discussion today on our topic, Allies on the DEI Journey. So we will begin and thank you, Anitra, for that warm welcome. So we will begin with brief opening remarks from each of our speakers. So with that being said, I will turn it over first to the brilliant, kind, and fabulous Dr. Katie Place.
Hi, thanks everyone for having me here today. I'm Dr. Katie Place. I'm an associate professor at Quinnipiac University in the School of Communication and Public Relations courses. And I am the past head of the Public Relations Division of AEJMC and one of the senior research fellows at the Page Center. And most recently, my research has centered on listening and listening with this commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion, and particularly intersectionality. And so I'm really excited to draw upon some of those research insights and how I've applied that to teaching today.
Okay, wonderful. Next, let's turn it over and hear from the fearless and fabulous Dr. Adrian Wallace.
Gosh, can you just follow me around and give me some really great hype all the time? I need that this week.
Yes,
Thank
yes.
you. I'm Dr. Adrian Wallace with Grand Valley State University. I work really closely with our student-run firm, Grand PR, and PRSSA at Grand Valley, where really sort of my journey started in trying to work with those smaller groups in order to be a better accomplice, which we'll talk about later. And I teach, mostly in campaigns courses, which gives me a unique opportunity to bring DE&I awareness and education to my students in every single class, which I'm endlessly grateful for. And I also learn. So these are, things that we can never stop learning, right? Mostly my research focuses on social media, the intersection of pre-professionalism, basically, and then firm life and getting students ready for the quote unquote real world.
Thank you so much, Dr. Wallace. And now, a gentleman who needs no introduction at all, the absolutely awesome Dr. Luke Capiza.
Thank you so much. I know I speak for the other panelists as well when, this is a humbling panel to be invited to, and I know we're all grateful to be able to share our perspectives. I'm an assistant professor at James Madison University. I've been there. This is my third year on faculty. Before that, I did my PhD at the University of Maryland, and before that, I was a practitioner for 8 years. And so I try to bring all of those experiences to my research as well as my teaching. And I think related to these issues that we're talking about today, it's a matter of saying, how can we ensure that diversity, equity, and inclusion are a part of every research project? They don't necessarily have to be at the center, but how do they find their way into what we're doing and inform everything that we're doing, that we're not leaving those issues out? And as a former professional, I think it's important for us to take the practical aspects of these issues into the classroom for students. There's no person practicing public relations today who doesn't have to answer these questions and think about these issues deeply. And so I think we have this incredibly important opportunity and responsibility to share our insights and as much learning as we can to help our students better understand and utilize all of the tools of research in doing a more effective job of tackling these issues in practice. So that's where I start when bringing this to the classroom.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much to all of our speakers today. And I thought a nice place to begin our discussion today is with our speakers telling us a little bit about their DEI journey and how they came to recognize this work as being important. So how about we begin, we'll mix it up a little bit, and how about we begin with Adrian this time? Would you tell us a little bit about your DEI journey and how you came to recognize this work as important?
Sure. I mean, I'm honestly ashamed to even answer this question because I've always felt like I have been an advocate, period, and have always strived to do, the quote unquote right thing, right? But what I realized is that white women are kind of a lot of the problem, honestly. And so in really accepting that myself, like into my core, basically, and understanding that it's not just about the vote I cast on election day. It's not just about the words that I say, but it's really the actions that I personally make in my space, right? So that might be my university or my community, and taking ownership over my lack of action, really, truly. Was I able to even start to make progress? And I love the title of this because it is like my journey, right? It is our journey. And I'm sort of fumbling around and trying to decide how to best help my students, when really I'm also still trying to figure out what I'm doing right, wrong, or indifferently, or how I can change my general activity into advocacy truly, not just casting a ballot, on election day. And so I had always sort of thought like that I was, I don't know, pretty well informed, and I honestly couldn't have been more wrong. And I accept that, and I've dedicated time in my personal life to working on that. I mean, I'm going to talk to my therapist about it. There's no place that this misses me right now. And I honestly harbor a lot of shame for that. But that is my issue. And so I'm working through that. But my journey in my classroom and how my personal journey intersects with my classroom really is that if I'm going through it, I'm sure others are too. And so instead of having to make people like admit it, or have that sort of like come to moment with me necessarily, I want us to have it together as our lived experience, so that we don't have shame and evoke any type of like you should have been. And I just want them to start their career in a more mindful and reasonable way that I did not, for example. And like Luke, and I think Katie too, I practiced for 20 years. I still practice. And so I'm able to bring this into my classroom. I'm able to take what I've learned into my current role with organizations and, my workplace. And so I think I am definitely looking at it as a journey, and I don't think I have a destination, so to speak. And so I'm just trying the best I can every single day to make action every single day. And that's where I personally am. I feel behind, but I think that, for me, this is motion right now, and I am, for fear of overuse I'm doing the best I can, but I am in trying to make sure that I'm correcting that as I go, because it is a grave mistake, and I'm earnestly sorry that I haven't been a better advocate.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Adrienne. I mean, and I think I can speak for everyone here today, like nobody is perfect, and we're all on this journey together. And I think one of the things that's so important about all of the Race in the Classroom series, and this one is as well, is it allows us to reflect on ourselves, and it allows us a way to engage this journey, because it's not a destination. I think it's an ongoing journey, and positive change requires all of us. And that's one of the things I think that makes forums like this one so important and so special. So I appreciate the vulnerability you shared, and the bravery that it took to be that vulnerable. So now, how about we hear from Katie, Dr. Place? What would you like to add? And you can expound on a different question, or you can continue the present one, describing your DEI journey and how you have come to recognize this work is important.
Great. I echo much of what Adrienne said. I really feel as if I'm on that same journey. And again, I think the most important thing is just never stop. If this is the first day of your journey, today is a perfectly fantastic day to start. And my journey, I would describe it as just constantly trying to be introspective and reflexive of, my position amidst various dominant groups or social identity groups, really understanding how that could contribute to oppression of others, and thinking about my actions, even down to my parenting, my research, my teaching, my membership in particular community groups. What are some ways I can use that reflexivity and listening, just showing up every day to help dismantle those forms of political or social or economic inequality. I definitely grew up in a pretty white, middle class, Southern, sterile suburb of Richmond, Virginia, and I did not encounter, diversity growing up. And I am so grateful for just the experiences I had as a graduate student, particularly at University of Maryland, to have access to such amazing courses and mentors and classmates, just to really get this critical understanding. I took feminist theory classes. I took sociology classes that really, really gave me just some amazing background. I'm looking at my books right now. We started out by reading, Bell Hooks and Chandra Mohanty, and just those readings provided me a fantastic foundation for then the teaching and the scholarship that I would do today. So I'll stop it out right there. I know we're going to go into so many more questions, but that's just kind of the beginning of my journey.
Yes, thank you so much for sharing that. And two things, everything that you said was just so rich and wonderful, but I liked two of them. I'll point out: never stop, right? Never stop. Sometimes we get tired, we get frustrated, but no matter what on the journey, we can't stop. And the other thing, when we're thinking about what to do, I loved what you said about showing up every day, right? Just showing up to the DEI journey and figuring out what you can do to advance it. So now I will turn it over to Dr. Capizzo. Please continue, feel free to continue in this line of questioning, describing your DEI journey and how you came to view this work as important, or if you'd like to take the conversation in a different direction, that is also welcome as well.
I wanted to talk a little bit about this in one of the ways that I introduce these topics to my students, which is, again, as a cisgendered, white, heterosexual gentleman, I think there's an awareness that has to happen of these issues, and it happens in stages, and it can happen and begin in many different ways. And for me, gender is in some ways the sort of gateway toward understanding the issues of power that Katie talked about so eloquently, that play themselves out in many different facets of our identities and our work. And very briefly, I know a number of you that I've talked to before know that I was a figure skater growing up. And so I was immersed in this universe of competition, of judging, and I was one of a very small number of men in that world. And I was one of a vast majority of white folks in that world. And having a younger sister who also competed, I realized by the time I was, 11 or 12, that I was getting so many more opportunities than she was. And it was because of my gender. Coaches were treating me differently because of my gender. People were nicer to me and cared about me more because of my gender and being, sort of special under those circumstances. As I got older, I had a number of friends, in particular, a couple of Black friends who were competing, and watched them literally be discriminated against in the judging system that existed at the time. And there are things that, again, I probably wouldn't have noticed if I didn't happen to have those connections. And so, into my career in practice in public relations, I ended up at a point being the only guy on a media relations team of 11 people. And again, I saw these issues of gender that played out in the clients that we were assigned, the opportunities that came to us. More aware of those issues at that time was that, these folks were more talented than I was. They were better at doing that public relations work. And yet there were times when they didn't have the opportunities that I did. And that's, that hurts to watch that happen. And there was a small amount that I think I was able to contribute in that direction while I was a practitioner. And I feel like I can do more in the classroom and in my work today. And so I think I try to help my students see that same process, that there are many, many different parts of their lives where they can start to see these issues emerge if they haven't already. And that gets us to a place where then, as a graduate student, I started to be able to integrate some of these theories that, again, I learned about in some of the same classes that Katie is talking about at Maryland, started to be able to bring these into my teaching. Maybe not in the best way to start, but again, that's that process that we all have as educators as well, to build our pedagogy and continually improve the work that we're doing and integrate these topics more and more centrally into what we're teaching.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that response. I really do appreciate the way you contextualized gender in the discussion. And I think it's something that Adrienne and Katie touched on as well. And I think now would be, I think it raises the question of intersectionality, and that's been gaining increased attention lately. So I was wondering if you guys might discuss how you view the connection or connections, as it were, between intersectionality and DEI. And then what can we do as educators to address these connections? So I don't know which one of you would like to take that first. I'm happy to call upon people, but if one of you guys feel organically ready, that's fine too. Thank you, Katie.
Yeah, I think intersectionality is where we need to be. We need to be there in our teaching and our research. And I think it's at its simplest form, just really helping our students understand that all individuals navigate within these multiple, complex, hybrid, fluid, intersecting identities and forms of lived experience. And really just having our students understand that will help them be more ethical and sensitive and inclusive communicators. And, I was rereading Crenshaw the other day, and where she talked about her identity as she formed this term intersectionality. And, she described as how she was constantly navigating conflicting political agendas and spaces. And I think we have to have that same mindfulness when we teach. Our students are navigating those borderlands, those hybrid and conflicting spaces. And so in my teaching and in my research, I think intersectionality can help us really understand that we have to constantly listen and be sensitive across these very, very complex cultural and community-based, geographic realms, and really attend to diversity, not only across them, but diversity inside each one of these spaces. And so it does give us this fantastic lens to be really cognizant of diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Absolutely, absolutely. Either Luke or Adrian, would you like to pick up on that? And then I do see we have a couple questions in the chat that I think we'd love to get to. Okay, please, Luke.
I'll just say, I think the issues that I have dealt with over the last 4 years, really, in trying to bring those concepts into the classroom, this is something that I've taken really seriously and is a process, right? We can't throw out our entire syllabus in a semester to change it, but what can we do every semester to increase the centrality of these issues, to have readings that start at the beginning of the semester. So it's not just DEI week, but we introduce the issues early on so we can reference them in many, many different contexts. How do we bring those into the assignments that we create? Students, I think, are often very interested in speaking about these topics. And so let's give them those opportunities with the grounding of some readings, right? With the grounding of Dr. Place's work, with Vardaman Winter and Tyndall 2010, right? All these readings that we know that do such a great job of putting these issues front and center in the context of professional public relations. We give the students the chance to really unpack and have their own sort of mini journey over the course of the semester, rather than having sort of one day of discussion. So that's where I start. And yes, I'll pop the readings into the chat and let Adrienne add.
Yeah, so I think, what we've all been talking about here are just the layers that make people unique, and how we can't assume that our students understand what we mean, and that we have to be deliberate in building foundation so that they can be successful going forward. And a big part of where I have the opportunity to talk about this, like I said, in campaigns classes particularly, is just about this idea of like target public, target audience, target market. And think about how simple you used to feel like that was before you decided to care about people, right? And how complex and complicated and unstereotypical we have to make these things now, because you can't place blanket judgment across anything for a brand or for yourself for that matter, right? And how we can tune students into making those decisions better, and how they can explain those and advocate for not only their brand or their firm or their whatever their business is, but also as humans, like on the planet together, right? And that I think, I try to approach this and I do all the same, things that you should do. And I'm into best practices and all of that in my classroom, but I also really want to recognize human elements. Like, we're people, we're not just like a list of criteria. We're not just like trying to sell things. Like, that's not only what we're doing here. And you have to really bring it back to what also the students want to be noticed for their individuality. And so for us to think that that is absent in our business practices would be foolish. And so we have really heartfelt and sometimes uncomfortable discussions in my classroom about this very thing, because you have to do better. You can't just think someone else will take care of it for them or help them through this situation later. It's our responsibility. And I take that really personally.
One of my favorite readings that I assign every year, and I know Natalie's on here, it's that one by Natalie Tyndall and Jen Vardaman Winter about the Heart Truth campaign and intersectionality. And it's about how the campaign kind of blanketed these statements or this campaign toward women. And what they found out, of course, the American Heart Association, is that women make meaning of messages differently based on, all these interesting and complex forms of identity and lived experience. And they really have they really miss the mark. And so it's always great for students to read that article and really understand, as Adrienne said, when you think about target publics, you cannot make these assumptions or put these facets of identity into particular silos. Adrienne, and I know Luke also, we teach campaigns, and I think that is just such a fantastic space to integrate these concepts and intersectionality. We choose these community, often activist or not-for-profit clients, and Connecticut is still one of the most segregated states in the United States. Income inequality is just out of the ballpark, and it offers us a space to really talk about that. It's not just race, it's not just class, it's not just gender. It's even within our own communities, we have these really interesting intersecting factors that we have to attend to when we communicate. And so service learning and campaigns work really, really can help students.
Absolutely. It's almost as if you guys responded in a way to Geneva's question, like our discussion anticipated it. But I'd like to know if we could dig a little bit deeper into her question, Geneva Green's question. How do you help your students understand that DEI awareness can strengthen your PR practice? I might wonder if we could elaborate on that question a bit more.
I'll start this one. I wondered so much about this that I made a model with one of my research partners so that we could use it as a tool. And students seem to respond pretty well to tools and templates, right? Which is like my horror, honestly. But a tool that can help them create their own practice is something that I was going after with Regina Luttrell from Syracuse. And so we created, from countless other HR models, one specific to the plight of the PR professional in this space. And there is no arguing that diversity, equity, inclusion creates better business outcomes. But again, I'm going to go back to it's just a good thing to do when you're a human being. And so continually sort of showing the business case, which shouldn't be the only case, certainly, And then aligning it with, what is just good practice as a person, and being aware and alert and a good constituent and a good citizen is something that I'm always talking about through this practice. And understanding that PR pros, I mean, it's time to like put your money where your mouth is, man. I mean, we can't just go along putting on black boxes on our Instagrams and call it a day. I mean, that's ridiculous. And I mean, I'm sure I'm not, this is probably preaching to the choir here, because everybody here is very aware. However, I don't think that sometimes our actions align with our knowledge base and our awareness. So to make that more acute and to bring that to the forefront, I finally just created a model and took a bunch of best practices and better suited it for what it is that I do in a creative classroom for creative problem solving. And it's difficult to talk through that model, I'll tell you, because people feel things and feelings are complicated. And before I even think about any of this, and I'm sure Katie and Luke, you have a similar experience, is that you have to establish a culture within your classroom that you can even have a discussion of this nature. I mean, there are plenty of classrooms I've been in, even observing other professors, that I don't know that I could have that discussion in that classroom, because that effort hadn't been made maybe in the beginning to create a safe space that people could articulate and kind of mess up sometimes too. I mean, like you said earlier, it's like, it's not a clear-cut solution to how people get to where, wherever they are, everyone's starting in a different space. So I think that's like the first part, is right, establishing that base and making it so that it feels comfortable for people to sometimes say the wrong thing and to be gracious about correction and discussion and, where they are, and vulnerability. Go back, Stan Brene Brown, because I know she's been doing this for a long time and she's sort of been Oprah-fied now, but like, I feel like that is a popular piece that people can, relate to, and bringing that into my classroom is the first thing I do. The second thing I do is obviously what we've just discussed, but have to lay that foundation or people won't even want to talk about that.
I think that is so important, establishing that culture and creating that safe space, because right now we're all, I think, on pins and needles.
Oh, everyone's on edge.
Right. I just had that discussion with my graduate students the other day. I'm like, let me know if anything is triggering here, because that's not my intent. My intent is to have a safe space of discussion. But excellent point. Do any of our other, please.
I would feel remiss in an IPR sponsored panel not mentioning and I always mess up the name, the Communicator's Guide to PR Measurement and Metrics, or something like that, that came out earlier this year. Mark Wiener was I think the lead author on it. Spectacular resource. And one of the phrases, and I've used it with upper level undergrads and they get it. I think it's one of the best tools that I've seen to help them really neatly apply measurement and metrics. So first of all, I say that we should be doing that for DEI as well, right? And helping them to understand that they should be tracking progress on these issues, that they should find ways, if they say that they are going to do things, if organizations say that they're going to take steps in these directions, to actually do it. And that guide uses the term say-do gap, right? And puts as part of our professional responsibility as practitioners the need to try to close the say-do gap. And I've really felt good about examples that I've used to put up in front of students and say, okay, this is what the organization said on Instagram. This is what they did. How do we think that they're doing? And they're pretty good at identifying sort of better and worse examples and coming up with ways to improve, right? In terms of what the organization is doing or what the organization is saying. And so I think that's yet another way to build on what Adrian said, that we can really tactically bring that into what we're doing in the classroom and demonstrate how that makes better PR practice, but also gives them as practitioners the sort of ethical responsibility of being the voice to say, hey, we're not living up to what we said we would be. And I really want to empower students to feel like they can stand up and make that statement in a meeting, even a year out of school. They're ready to do that, and people will listen to them.
Absolutely. Please.
Yes, definitely. Everything Adrian and Luke have said. When students have a hard time seeing the business sense or the importance of DEI for public relations, I bring up triple bottom line. I say, as organizations, we are not amoral corporations or organizations anymore. We have to consider, of course, our profit if you're a corporation, and people, And so really talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion, and allyship with regard to that people, and then the planet or sustainability. And students get a broader picture. But also echoing what Luke and Adrian said, I think it has to start with just that community building. This doesn't have to be some kind of groundbreaking conversation in the classroom. I think it's most effective when it starts with just those daily conversations. So Tuesday night, one of our executives at Quinnipiac sent out this fantastic email with resources in advance of Halloween for cultural appropriation. And I was like, hey, did everybody read the email? And yeah, and it just, I referenced the email and we started talking about, and how could that apply to PR? What are some ways that organizations or brands have missed the mark with regard to that? And so just kind of bringing in everyday headlines or examples. There was a sexist coffee ad that came out a while, and I said, guys, what is going on here? What can we do if you would rewrite the copy in that ad, what would you say? And, and so just every day we have those conversations and it makes it more fluid. And of course, we all make mistakes, and I like how that's been mentioned and just allowing for that space.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you. Very well contextualized. I wanted to return to a question that we got earlier in the chat that we overlooked, the discussion kind of moved beyond, but I want to come back to it. And it's from, and please forgive me if I mispronounce your name, and you can also unmute yourself and then tell us how to say it properly. But it's from Elif Toker Turnalar. And she asked, oh, did you go ahead? Tell me how to pronounce that.
No, it's absolutely fine. Elif is fine.
Elif. Okay. Thank you, thank you. And you asked, when did you first notice this? As I am unsure if many do, or perhaps do and ignore it naturally. Will you kind of add a little bit more context to and clarification to your question? Thank you.
Sure. I was referring to what Luke said about when he was younger as an ice skater and how he realized that he was being treated differently to his sister. And because I'm intrigued that you realize this, and I'm just, fascinated by how and when, what was the experience that would allow you to actually realize that?
I think for me, there were, in that example, just so many instances of what I saw as different and what I saw as harmful for her versus the opportunities that I was given. And I also was very, very lucky to have in late high school and in early undergraduate at Michigan State, other seminars and other workshops that helped to sort of walk us into the ideas of white privilege, the way that media cover race and gender in stereotypical ways. This was the late 90s and early 2000s, so there was so many examples, unfortunately, right, that you could just open any newspaper and see examples of racist or sexist characterizations as part of media. And not that that's gone away, but I think they might be at least a little bit harder to find or occur a little bit less often today, which is a good thing, and because journalists are doing that work as well. That said, I think that talking about our individual journeys is helpful because it helps students to, number one, realize that they don't necessarily know everything, right? That, as everyone has mentioned, right, we as faculty need to be transparent with our own mistakes, our own constant learning, and the need to put sustained effort into this work. And so I think that's, if anything, the most important takeaway for me, that this doesn't stop, that this is continuing, and that those are conversations that I can continue to have with students as my own awareness evolves and grows as well.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Luke. I want to turn our attention to another question that's kind of core to the title and the content of today's program. And that is, I'd like to ask you guys, what do you think makes a good ally to students? And then also, what makes a good ally to your colleagues? Who'd like to start us off there?
I can start.
Thank you, Adrian.
Sure. So for my students, and honestly, something that it took me a very long time. Again, my admittance of late bloomerism here. With my students, it took me a long time to realize that you need to deliberately ask for participation in your classroom surrounding specific, maybe prickly topics, right? Something that might make people naturally uncomfortable. I think also something that I have started to do in an effort not to one, tokenize, and two, embarrass. Certainly, I never want to do that, but would be to have a discussion. I have a predominantly white institution. Our BIPOC percentage is, shamefully low. I'll just say it. And I've made an effort to connect deliberately one-on-one and ask them, my BIPOC students, because there are so few of them. And I can't even imagine how that feels, to be honest with you. Get in here. Like, I want everything you have. I want everything that you are. I want you to be in PRSSA. I've been making deliberate asks. And the first time I did that, I felt like a moron. I didn't want to make anyone feel embarrassed or anything. And it was, of course, one-on-one. And the person said to me, I've never been asked. So yes. And I thought, I want to die right here, because this is, honestly, I'm so embarrassed of my own lack of understanding in this space. And I feel like by the time students have me and have had me maybe once or twice, they know my heart, right? They understand that I might not do it right. And I'm kind of awkward sometimes, but like, what you see is what you get. And I'm trying to do the, best for everybody, and best by you, certainly my student. And so I have just come to just embrace sort of that awkward period and just ask, because no one else is, and that's not okay. For my colleagues, there's several people on this call that have witnessed what my very first attempt at being transparent and an advocate. We're in a meeting with a lot of people on this call here, which is, somebody had asked a question, and one of my colleagues had answered it, and the person championing the conversation asked the same question as though my colleague had never made the answer. And I was certainly that I must have misheard that and misunderstood what that was. But in the thick of in that moment, this is a perfectly fine answer. And she just gave you she gave you a 4-step program for what you need to do. I don't know why you didn't hear that. And so just saying it, I feel like a lot of people sit in meetings, especially on Zoom, and are thinking like, why did that person's answer not get accepted or heard? And why did we just overlook that? And you got to just say it. I mean, it feels weird. I'm going to tell you, sometimes you look like not a very nice person, but it is the right thing to do. And it has to be done, because if you're not doing it, no one else is. So you have to just stump into the awkwardness and make it feel that, and do it in the most polite way possible. But sometimes it isn't going to feel polite, and you have to just do it anyway, because that's on us. We have to do that. We have to advocate for our peers at our institutions and our communities, on a Zoom call, in a classroom, at a faculty meeting, whatever, because it's too important to ignore. I don't know. I just got verklempt, but I feel like it is up to us, and we have to understand that if not us, then who? And that's a big responsibility. Some people may not be ready for it, but you got to just do it.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly just echo everything Adrian said. And I'm so grateful for Adrienne, especially as, she was a very important voice in the PRD and how we responded in the wake of Black Lives Matter and social unrest in 2020. And just speaking up and starting these really difficult, hard conversations. And sometimes we stumble, we make mistakes, we don't say the right thing, we are tone deaf, but we never stop. We're steadfast in our commitment to our colleagues. And I think one thing that I learned from that experience, and even Adrian and just everything, is the importance of just showing up and just listening and shut up, Katie, don't speak. Just, you really have to listen here and educating yourself. And so that's how I'm trying to do it with colleagues and in the work, and really understand, like Adrienne said too, it's not just something performative. It's not just putting a black screen on our social media. It's trying to incite measurable actual change, like really setting objectives and ensuring that we're hiring or ensuring that we're creating, co-constructing this language and co-constructing these programs together. So it's been a really tough, a learning experience for myself too, and an amazing growth experience. With students too, I echo what everybody said with just always having an open door and really I try to embrace that kind of feminist ethic of just listening. And again, this co-creation that I am not all knowing, and that we're all in this together as an amazing community, and always being an ally in that regard. It's just I'm stumbling on my words. It's a journey, and it's often very hard, and we often all together make mistakes. But if we're in this together and we're committed, we'll make amazing strides.
Very practically, to make an end cap to this, one easy thing that many of us, as I think particularly men, but all of us can do, is join those DEI committees, right? Like, there's no reason why a DEI committee should be made up disproportionately of folks who are already burdened with additional service responsibilities, generally often have more time spent on teaching and advising students than I do as a white guy, right? So I should be spending time on that committee, at the department level, at the college level, in national service organizations, wherever the best use of my time is at that moment, right? So we can go out and do that work too. And that's something that I've tried to do pretty deliberately, especially over the last 2 years, once I sort of got my feet on the ground at my current institution, because it's a place where I know I can make a difference quickly and take that responsibility off of the plates of others. I think in terms of one term, I'm going to bring this up. I need to, since we're getting closer to the end, and I need to credit Adrienne for this. In our pre-meeting conversation, she used the term accomplice rather than ally. And I've been thinking a lot over the past week about why I preferred the term accomplice. And I'd love to hear everyone's thought on this as well. But I think for me, the term ally gives the sense of sort of an equal relationship or understanding, right? There's a balance there. And I think that I prefer the term accomplice, in part because I see our role in the classroom, in the profession, in the service work that it takes to run a university, at a certain point in this piece, as a white person, as trying to serve the role of others, right? Trying to serve the needs of others. So I am an accomplice in that I'm not the one who decides what the end goal is, right? And so I think that in all of my reflection on that since our conversation, that's part of why that resonated so much with me. So thank you, Adrienne, for giving me the language to better express that.
Well, I can't take credit for that. That was the Beyonce of marketing, Brandy Boner. Invite her to your PRSSAs, your classes, and she does do a fabulous job of explaining how that works. And same thing, it hit me like a ton of bricks. Of course. Yes, that is what I want to be. That is who I aspire to be. And that is what needs to happen.
Absolutely, absolutely. We all probably on this call, if you're here, you probably have a commitment to DEI. But one of the things that's just as real as the growing interest in it and the strengthening commitments is the resistance. And sometimes we encounter that in our classrooms, in faculty meetings, et cetera. I was wondering if our panelists today might be willing to talk a little bit about how to manage that resistance, whether it's in the classroom with students or in a meeting with colleagues.
I can start out speaking to that. Our first, and I will kind of preface this with Quinnipiac is, again, a primarily white private university in the Northeast. And my campaign's clients have been very racially diverse activist organizations. And so I was so thrilled to have Mothers and Others for Justice, an activist organization based out of New Haven, as our first client. And I could not believe my ears when a student said, I don't believe in low-income housing. My dad told me that low-income housing would bring down the status of my community. And I just was stopped in my tracks because I thought everybody in the classroom was going to be on board with this fantastic client and their mission and everything we're going to get accomplished. And so I realized what I needed to do as a facilitator of this classroom is actually take it back so much more and really assign. We really had some dialogue. So just community dialogue to really understand what was even going on with particular individuals, background biases, or what would even, spark someone to say that, or, so we did a lot of turning in and reflecting, reflection papers or quick writes. We did have guest speakers from the community come in and share their lived experience, and that really helped students to get outside of their own, biases or boxes. I signed some TED Talks. We did so much work just amongst ourselves to really, understand where we were coming through and coming from. And ultimately, I feel like that addressing that pushback from all sides and really having that dialogue and that discussion, everybody was then able to kind of come and really better serve the client. So I think that's something we can even carry on as we prepare students, just always be always be reflexive, always understanding where your biases or your lived experiences could impact the messaging you create, or just down to everything within a campaign. And so that was one really my first experience with just that pushback in the classroom. And it was such a difficult, so I'm interested in hearing what Luke and Adrian have experienced as well, and what are some tools or techniques they utilize to really foster this inclusivity and attentiveness to DEI in the classroom.
I think something I've talked a lot about in recent years has been like, there's not a finite amount of resources. Like if somebody else, it's not pie, right? I've seen that a lot. There's enough opportunity. No one is going to go without because somebody else is going with, like this sort of like scarcity idea that I don't know where it's even come from. I'm sure, political dealings is where we're at here with this, but I was in I'm trying to be as vague as possible with this because I don't want to out anybody that to make them embarrassed, not on this call, obviously, but I was in a committee meeting, and we were talking about, just like I said earlier, recruitment retention is something that I don't think gets enough attention, is just the idea that once we create a community, we have to retain our community. And the first question from after we sort of had this robust discussion was, well, what about, and I wrote it down, I wrote it down for use here too, was, well, what about the white kids? And I thought, first of all, who has the audacity to say that out loud? First of all, who's your parent? Who's your mother? Second of all, what in the world would make you think that trying to recruit or retain a more diverse campus community would make anybody else not have a better experience? How did this get like that a population would be pushed out in order to include? And and something I've adopted, and what Katie had talked about earlier too, is just the idea of like, just letting it sit there for a sec, let that sit there. And then sometimes, and what I had learned from a podcast at some point about conflict was just to reiterate the statement as a question, acknowledging what the question was, which was, then I said, well, what about them? And and explain yourself, man, like what in the world are we talking about here? And so then that did get us on a path of inclusion, not uninclusion, not discluding people, and not trying to make anyone feel better, worse. There is no hierarchy here. We just want to have a better community, period. That doesn't mean people have to go without, or some people get more or whatever. Again, back to the pie. It isn't pie. We can all have it. Nobody wins if we're not trying in this way. Like, we all lose. There's plenty of room for us to win. And I've been talking about this with regard to women, how we treat each other, for a very long time too. We can all win. And so this sort of transcends that, but you got to have the conversation and push that back. And ask the question and make them explain and hold people accountable. And I mean, I don't know if this is like my new chosen thing, but I'm not afraid to ask that question. I don't think anybody should be. And we should be asking the question of ourselves when something kind of goes sideways like that, and holding our communities accountable, because we can't change things if it doesn't happen that way. And again, we can all, like, this is winning for everybody. There's no like taking from anybody to make this happen in a creative and constructive way. So I don't know, creating the place to have that question and the space to make that happen is something I think is really important. And to Katie's point earlier, which was, building upon those things, right? Like, okay, we're gonna have this difficult question today, and tomorrow we're not gonna rehash this again. We're just gonna keep moving. We're gonna keep getting better, not keep it going back to sub-zero. So.
Absolutely. Excellent. I love your point about we can all win together. That's the whole point. Like, we literally can, but if we don't work together, we can also all fail apart as well. I want to just I know we're almost out of time here, and I just love this discussion, but I see that I missed a chat in the discussion from a question in the chat from Elizabeth Marsh, and I think it's a good one. So I wonder if our participants might take 30 seconds to reflect on her question and address it. And that question is, given that most of our departments are majority female, I'm guessing, right? How do you all respond to folks wanting to include white men in the underrepresented group? That's a great question. I see Luke shaking his head.
I think you should take that, Luke.
Oh gosh. Let me say 2 seconds that relates to the prior question, which is, again, another one of the pieces of privilege that I have is that I teach these issues. I try to teach them sort of full bore and not water them down, and I don't get a lot of pushback. And so I hope that that's a call to all of the men in particular in this room, that you have a responsibility to bring up issues of race and gender in the classroom, in part because particularly maybe the 3 or 4 men who are in our PR classes, that's a different conversation, might hear this in a different way coming from you and maybe have more of an impact coming from you. And because it's not going to hurt us in the same way that I know it often hurts women, particularly women of color, in terms of their reviews and student evals, right, at the end. So at least in my experiences, I'm not introducing these issues in a way that's super partisan, but I think I can do it in a way that is complete and holistic and strong without emphasizing the political divide that these can bring up as much as possible, to try to be, again, to welcome everyone to that conversation. And I don't think that white men are underrepresented in the academy at any level. I don't think that there's additional value in departments of communication or in public relations in the academy of providing any sort of extra privilege or opportunity to white men in terms of the job search. Sorry. Easy answer.
Absolutely. In the last couple seconds, does anyone else have anything they'd like to ask or add? Ask or add. Now I see a thumbs up from Dr. Ford. Anything else? Well, I'll say this. I love that idea that we can all win together. And isn't that a wonderful thing to take us into the weekend? And with that, I will turn it back over to Anitra.
Thank you all for being here, and thank you all for such a great panel. Again, I just want to remind you all that this was recorded and the replay will be available shortly on institute4pr.org. So if you missed anything, make sure you come back to the replay to see it. Also, Nikki, I just want to ask, there were so many great resources that were placed in the chat. Is there a way that we can pull those out and maybe post them under the replay? So just in case anybody missed those, that they can get them. All right,
They'll
awesome.
be there.
So again, we're right at the hour. Thanks again so much to our panelists, to you, Nika, for moderating such a great panel, and to all of our participants. And we will see you next month for Race in the PR Classroom. Have a great day.